Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the mammoth $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill before the Senate. On Sunday night, we finally got to see the 2,700-page infrastructure bill that we will be voting on sometime tomorrow or Saturday. And what we saw is that Democrats want to give billions of dollars to unelected bureaucrats in the Biden administration to spend however they please. This bill spends $21.5 billion to create a new office at the Department of Energy called the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which would give President Biden's Secretary of Energy the power to use taxpayer dollars to invest in whatever green energy initiative she likes. Reminiscent of Solyndra, we can have the same bankruptcies at taxpayer expense. This bill spends $24 million in taxpayer dollars to preserve the water in San Francisco Bay. And the Long Island Sound would receive $106 million in taxpayer dollars. As the New York Times reported, quote, climate resiliency programs would receive their largest burst of government spending ever from this bill. And the Wall Street Journal rightly called it, quote, a major down payment on President Biden's Green New Deal. That's exactly what this bill is. Furthermore, this bill institutes a new tax on 42 chemicals that will raise prices for everyday consumers. Texans will bear the brunt of these higher prices because 40% of the manufacturing plants that this new tax will hit are in Texas alone. But this tax will also hurt Louisiana and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio and other manufacturing states. Indeed, this provision will also likely make many of the raw materials used in infrastructure projects more expensive. I filed an amendment that would strike this harmful provision. Not only will manufacturing plants in Texas be hurt by this new tax, but for some of these plants, the new taxes will exceed profit margins, leading to plant closings and more manufacturing moving to China. In effect, the loss of these plants would result in lower tax revenue to the federal government, not more. Imports would rise, U.S. exports would fall, and production in the United States would fall as well. Ironically, this infrastructure bill also tries to grow more critical minerals manufacturing and personal protective equipment, or PPE, manufacturing in America. But it places a brand new tax on both of these things. PPE is made with many of the 42 chemicals this infrastructure bill now wants to tax. And 4 of these chemicals are on the Biden administration's own critical minerals list. The old saying was, if it moves, tax it, and if it stops moving, subsidize it. Well, this bill taxes the things that we're trying to get moving in the first place. This bill is also a liberal spending wish list. The fact of the matter is, this bill spends too much money and it's not paid for. We're told that this bill would in part be paid for with $205 billion in repurposed COVID relief funds. But when the bill text was released, magically those funds weren't there. It became apparent instead only about $50 billion in COVID funds was being used to help pay for this bill. Some have claimed that the bill is paid for, but by any measure, the pay-fors are quite simply gimmicks. This is a bait and switch, and the bill is not paid for like we were promised. At a time when we've spent trillions of dollars already to combat a deadly pandemic, at a time when we're seeing rising inflation across the country, we can't responsibly be spending yet another $1 trillion. This bill is part of a much broader problem we're having with reckless federal spending. Furthermore, suppose this so-called bipartisan $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill was being offered in exchange for the Democrats' massive $3.5 trillion reckless tax and spend bill. In that case, I could understand the logic of doing the smaller bill instead of the massive bill. But it's not being offered in exchange. The Democrats have made it clear that they're going to pass this infrastructure bill, take every penny of the spending, and then turn around and try to ram through their massive $3.5 trillion tax and spend bill right on top of this. Which means we're looking at about $5 trillion of spending in just those two bills. That means trillions of dollars in new taxes. If you pay taxes, they're going up. It means corporate taxes are going up. It means individual taxes are going up. It means small business taxes are going up. It means capital gains taxes are going up. It means the death tax is going up. All while our debt is going through the roof and inflation is rising across the country. Republicans shouldn't play a part in this. We should instead say enough is enough. Look, the American people want good roads and good bridges. I want good roads and good bridges. But what this bill does reminds me of the old swindler who says over and over again, I'm going to sell you a bridge. I'm going to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. Because the proponents of this bill are selling the same bridge over and over and over again. They go on TV, they say bridges are popular, roads are popular. You want roads and bridges, therefore we got to do this. So let's see what the actual spending looks like to understand the shell game that's being paid. This bill has about $100 billion for roads and bridges. You know what? If the Democrats want to pass just that, $100 billion for roads and bridges, I bet you we could get 90 senators to agree with that. We could be done and go home this evening. And let me remind my fellow senators, $100 billion? It's a lot of money. We aren't talking about $5 in a soda machine in the hall. We aren't talking about $100. We're talking $100 billion, which in history is massive spending. But compare that to the $1.2 trillion in this bill. It's not monopoly money. It's not make-believe money. It's taxpayer dollars, and it's money we're borrowing from China and debt that we're putting on our kids and grandkids. And the roads and bridges part of this bill, in the context of the larger spending free-for-all in Washington, is about 1/86th the explosive spending going on. Let's compare that to the overall spending going on in this bill and the total spending so that it's not in a silo or a vacuum. It's all together. The $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill today is roughly 12 times the new spending on roads and bridges. So they're selling the roads and bridges, but the bill's 12 times bigger. But that ain't it. A few months ago, the Democrats ran through a massive so-called COVID relief bill. Only 9% of the bill actually went to health care spending for COVID. That was $1.9 trillion. So that was roughly 19 times larger than what's being spent on roads and bridges. Mind you, we keep being told roads and bridges are good. That bill was 19 times that. And then the massive $3.5 trillion tax and spend bill that is coming right after this, that the Democrats intend to ram through, that is 35 times the spending on roads and bridges. And when you add up the spending from December 2020 to now, with the Biden budget request, with the Democrats' tax and spend reconciliation proposal, with this infrastructure bill, with the so-called COVID relief bill, and with the emergency spending in December, you hit a whopping $9.5 trillion. That is 86 times the new spending on roads and bridges. You know, that's hard to wrap your mind around. These numbers all seem abstract, millions, billions, trillions. It's hard to know what you're talking about. So let's see if we can make it a little more real. To understand the comparative size, let's take a look at the average American home right here. Average American home is about 20 feet tall. Compare that to a giant sequoia tree. It's about 240 feet tall, 10 times as much. That's a lot. But compare that to Big Ben, 380 feet tall. Compare that to Trump Tower in New York City at 700 feet tall. Compare that to One Shell Plaza, where I used to work in Houston, Texas. Or compare that to the Sears Tower, now called the Willis Tower. I don't know why. I liked Sears. Compare that to the Sears Tower at 1,400 feet tall. The Sears Tower is 70 times as tall as the average American house. The Democrats' reckless spending is more than 70 times what's being spent on roads and bridges. So when you see politicians going on TV saying, isn't it going to be great to have a new freeway? Isn't it going to be great to repair a bridge? Yes, we should do that. They're selling this. That's what they're selling, this tiny little bit. But understand that what they're ramming through is this. They're ramming through trillions of dollars. To give you a sense of what $9.5 trillion means, if the Democrats get their way, Congress will be spending $28,563 for every single American. So I ask you at home, you got 28 grand sitting around? The Democrats think you do. They want to spend it. I've said more than once, dear God, please let nobody tell the Democrats what comes after $1 trillion. These numbers are real. To put that in perspective, indexed for inflation, the United States government spent $4.1 trillion to win World War II. $4.1 trillion to win World War II. The greatest generation, scaling the cliffs of Normandy, beating the Nazis. The Democrats, in 7 months, are spending more than double what we spent to win World War II. This is reckless, and it's unprecedented. As Admiral Akbar said in Star Wars, it's a trap! This is a trap. This is a trap. Now listen, for Democrats, it's what they campaign on. If you're a Democrat, you want to raise taxes and raise spending. You want more debt from China. That's what Democrats do. But for Republicans, come on, guys. We're like Charlie Brown with Chuck Schumer being Lucy in the football. And you've got Republicans happily running, going, oh, he's going to keep the football, he's going to keep the football. And every time Lucy pulls the football up back, and we go up in the air and land in our rear. It'd be nice for Republicans not to fall for it again. The Senate Minority Leader is fond of saying, there's no learning in the second kick from a mule. Well, there are a whole lot of Republicans that seem eager to get kicked a second time from a mule. The spending that we're looking at, I want to repeat again, is more than double what the United States spent to win World War II in 7 months. if you care about your kids, if you care about your grandkids, that's irresponsible. And let me tell you something it's causing. It's causing inflation across this country. You know, families at home in Texas and Virginia, across the country, families, they go to the grocery store. They buy food for that week. They buy milk, they buy cereal, they buy fruit. They're noticing the cost of groceries going up and up and up. You get to the cash register and gosh, that cost a lot more than it cost a month ago, and it cost a lot more than it cost 3 months ago, and it costs a lot more than it cost a year ago. Then when you go out and fill up your car with gas, you notice the cost has gone way, way up. And then maybe you go with your daughter to Home Depot to buy some lumber. And you look at the prices of the lumber and you think, is this a typo? How did these prices go so high? And then maybe you go to buy a new house and you see the prices of a new house, the average new house going up $20,000 to $30,000. Last decade or so, we've been living in a little bit of a holiday from history. Inflation has not been a major factor for many people, particularly many young people don't know what inflation is. Mr. President, you and I are both old enough to remember the 1970s. We remember the Jimmy Carter presidency. We remember double-digit inflation. We remember 20% home mortgage rates. Inflation is a cruel tax. It's a tax on the middle class. It's a tax on working men and women. It's a tax on anyone with a fixed income, and it's a tax in particular on seniors. Millions of seniors across this country on Social Security struggling to make ends meet. Their income isn't going up. But thanks to the Democrats' reckless spending and endless printing of money, their expenses are going up each and every month. This is wrong. This is harmful. The inflation bomb we are facing is hurting Americans. In a perfect world, I would ask my Democratic colleagues to reconsider. How about we spend just what we spent on World War II, not twice as much? In a perfect world, that might seem like a reasonable proposition. Actually, in a perfect world, anyone would say, are you out of your mind to spend what you spent on World War II? But I'm not naive enough to think that Democrats are suddenly going to see the light. I hope, though, at least some Republicans will. If you vote for this monstrosity, it will open the door to trillions more. That's harmful for our country. And if you're being told it's all about roads and bridges, just remember the one little house we saw. Roads and bridges are 1/86th of the total spending that's being rammed through. These trillions are 86 times more. We can't afford it. It's irresponsible. And I urge every senator to say, enough is enough. Stop the madness. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cruz.
We talked just a minute ago about the difference between law and politics. We heard some impassioned political speeches, but also a question that just was asked by my friend from New Jersey. Is there anything in this memo to tell a parent that they're being targeted for harassment and intimidation? I would note that the letter from the school boards cited 20 instances, 15 of which were nonviolent. The letter from the school board described them as domestic terrorism. Within days, the Department of Justice snapped to the commands of the special interest and issued a memo, a directive to the Department of Justice and a directive to the FBI. This is, again, where law matters. The opening sentence describes a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. Now, you spent a long time as a judge when you have three things listed. Am I correct that anyone interpreting that, reading it, would conclude that harassment and intimidation are something different than threats of violence, given that you listed each of the three out separately? Is that consistent with the canons of construction?
The memorandum is addressed to professional prosecutors.
I asked you a question, not who it was addressed to.
Senator, at least let him respond.
No, not when he answers a non sequitur. If
He
he wants
may
to answer
respond
okay,
any
you're
way-
taking my time now. This is not coming out of my time.
Listen,
when I ask a question,
We've given
he
you
can
more
answer the-
time than any other senator.
Mr. Chairman,
Now, listen,
when I ask
all I'm
a
asking
question,
is allow him to respond.
Mr. Chairman, when I ask a question, he can answer the question, but he's proceeding to ask a total non sequitur. I asked about the canons of construction on the board.
Please let him respond.
I'll ask the question again. The opening line of the memo specifies harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. Is it correct under the ordinary canons of construction that a legal reader would understand that harassment and intimidation means something different from threats of violence? Is that correct?
A legal reader would know Virginia versus Black, the Supreme Court definition of intimidation, and a legal reader would know 18 U.S.C. 2261A, the definition of harassment.
And would a parent?
This was not addressed to parents.
But you know, parents read it. You're the Attorney General of the United States. You said you can't think of anything harassing. You directed the G-men, the FBI, to go after parents. All right, let's move on to a different topic. We've sadly seen that you are willing to use the enforcement power of the Department of Justice to target those who have political views different than you, even if it's a mom at a PTA meeting. Let's try the other side. Are you willing to enforce the law fairly against people who are political allies of the president? At a Senate hearing in May, Dr. Fauci said, quote, "The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology." That was under oath, under testimony. On October 20th, the NIH principal deputy director, in writing, directly contradicted it. Those two statements cannot be true. As you know, Section 1001 of Title 18 makes it a federal crime to knowingly make false statements to Congress. Is the Department of Justice investigating Dr. Fauci for lying to Congress, and will you appoint a special prosecutor to do so?
I'm going to say again, the memorandum that I issued is not partisan in any way. It has nothing to do with what I agree with or I don't agree with. I don't care whether the threats of violence come from the left or the right.
Could you answer
Now,
the
with
question I
respect to
asked?
The second question, we don't comment on criminal investigations or other investigations.
Well, amazingly, when it's the political enemies of the administration, you comment loudly in a memo. Let me ask one other question.
You're not asking- you weren't-
President Biden recently said in a national town hall that police officers who decline to get vaccinated should be fired. Do you agree with President Biden on that?
I think all police officers, look, I stood on the stage at the mall where the 700 and some police officers who died this year were commemorated.
Let me try again. Do
Huge
you agree with the
percentage
president? It's a yes or no. You've asked questions as a judge. You know how to get a yes or no. Do you agree with the president? Yes or no?
A large percentage of the law officers who died this year died from
Do
COVID-19.
you agree with President Biden that police officers who decline to get vaccinated should be fired? Yes or no?
And if they had been vaccinated, they wouldn't have died.
So is that a yes? You do agree with the
Not
president?
one police officer.
In Chicago, a third of the police officers did not file their vaccination status. Do you think Chicago should fire a third of its police officers when murder rates and crime rates are skyrocketing?
This is a determination that the city of Chicago will have to make.
So do you agree with the president? The president said yes. Do you agree with him? You are the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. Do you agree with Joe Biden saying fire police officers despite skyrocketing crime rates?
That is a question that is one of state law there and will have to be decided by the state.
You have no view on whether we should fire
Senator,
cops?
your time has expired.
Well, you used 2 minutes.
No, I certainly did not. Senator.
Em không đi tìm người yêu lý tưởng đâu anh. Em không đi tìm người yêu tuyệt đối đâu anh. Em không đi tìm người yêu nhan sắc mỹ miều, người yêu đai các cao sang, lụa lá gấm hoa vàng son. Em không đi tìm người yêu đôi trắng thay đen, không đi tìm người yêu say đắm xa hoa. Em không đi tìm người yêu cao quý ngọc ngà, lầu cao xe các anh ơi, có gì vẫn luôn vững bền. Anh ơi, em tìm người yêu chung thủy, em tìm người yêu trong mơ, dẫu nghèo nguyện không đổi lòng. Anh ơi, biết rằng ở đời ai không muốn đẹp giàu và cao sang, vì em nghèo đâu dám mơ. Anh ơi, em tìm người yêu không ước mơ cao. Anh ơi, em tìm người yêu thương mái tranh xiêu. Mai đây cho dù rằng đời góc bế chân trời, cuộc đời bão táp phong ba, suốt đời có nhau bên mình. Em không đi tìm người yêu lý tưởng đâu anh, em không đi tìm người yêu tuyệt đối đâu anh. Em không đi tìm người yêu nhan sắc mỹ miều, người yêu đai các cao sang, lụa lá gấm hoa vàng son. Em không đi tìm người yêu đôi trắng thay đen, em không đi tìm người yêu say đắm xa hoa. Em không đi tìm người yêu cao quý ngọc ngà, lầu cao xe các anh ơi, có gì vẫn luôn vững bền. Anh ơi, em tìm người yêu chung thủy, em tìm người yêu trong mơ, dẫu nghèo nguyện không đổi lòng. Anh ơi, biết rằng ở đời ai không muốn đẹp giàu và cao sang, vì em nghèo đâu dám mơ. Anh ơi, em tìm người yêu không ước mơ cao. Anh ơi, em tìm người yêu thương mái tranh xiêu. Mai đây cho dù rằng đời góc bế chân trời, cuộc đời bão táp phong ba, suốt đời có nhau bên mình. Mai đây cho dù rằng đời góc bế chân trời, cuộc đời bão táp